Chess Diagnostic.
Hello everybody, this is a game between Vassily Ivanchuk and Garry Kasparov that was played in 1991. It's a very interesting game because Ivanchuk manages to completely box in Kasparov with two bishops versus two knights and checkmate him in the end. Ivanchuk was 21 when he played this game, and it starts with e4, c5, knight to f3, d6. So after bishop to b5, we get the Canal-Sokolsky attack. White's just playing in the center. Now, the standard move here is to bring the bishop out and then try to get your knight to a better square, but Kasparov likes to play a little more complicated, tries to keep more pieces on the board, and really put it to this bishop here. White castles, Kasparov takes the pawn, and then Ivanchuk takes with his queen. So after the bishop is threatened with a6, he decides to take. And whether h6 is played or not, he'd probably take this knight anyway, because this pawn formation here is part of White's strategy of boxing in these two bishops. So it's two knights versus two bishops. And the main strategical question is Black going to be able to open the position and start an attack, or is White going to be able to close the position, box in Black, and cause a lot of problems for Black's centralized king? So after c4, of course, planning knight to c3, you can see that White is planning to advance some pawns and try to close off the queen side. Black's advancing this pawn, trying to gain some space, but there's really not much he can do at this point. Bringing the bishop out here doesn't really activate it. Of course, h3 to stop Black from playing h3 himself, weakening White's pawn structure, having to play g3. So at this point, if we evaluate it, you can see that Black has two bishops that are largely inactive. White's pawns, as well as Black's pawns, are cutting off all the activity from these two minor pieces. Whereas White has managed to keep things locked up pretty good and threatening to advance his pawns on the queen side more to lock up that area as well. So this move helps White a little bit because now, of course, not taking, possibly opening a position, but b5, keeping it closed. The only drawback is that White has a weak pawn on c4. Threatening c4, the knight comes back to protect c4 and also potentially prepare f4. Of course, he doesn't want to trade queens. He wants to keep as many pieces on the board and try to keep Black locked up, because a key thing when your opponent is suffocating for space is you don't trade pieces, because that just makes his task even more difficult. So it looks like, of course, Black is trying to start a kingside attack, but his minor pieces and this rook can't really activate themselves yet. If the queen comes in here, it doesn't really accomplish anything. So White's just playing in the center. Of course, he doesn't want to advance any pawns, so he protects this threatened g2 pawn with his rook. Protects the other pawn with the rook. And Ivanchuk decides to try to reroute his knight and also prepare a brilliant sacrifice to activate his own knights. So what do you think White should do next? Alright, so in this position, Ivanchuk makes a very standard but brilliant sacrifice to activate his knights. So when your knights don't really have any squares, what you want to do is you want to give them strong squares. So c5 doesn't really sacrifice a pawn even, because he's going to win it back, but it temporarily sacrifices a pawn. And it looks at first sight that Black's rook becomes active, but it doesn't really have any squares on this rank, and this file will be more useful for White than for Black. So, of course, knight to c4, threatening the pawns. which have become quite weak. Now the king is going to try to escape, but after knight takes b6, now black's queen side is starting to fall apart. Of course, these bishops are still completely inactive. f4. Of course, black doesn't want white to play f4 himself, further closing off the position and activating his own pieces. So even white takes on f5, it doesn't really activate anything for black yet. And of course, now white is going to penetrate on the c file. Of course, not pawn takes, because after queen takes, he's going to win either this rook or black will have to sacrifice a piece. So of course, g4 chases the rook back even further. That was pretty much black's only active piece. And now with knight to c8, threatening the bishop, which has to go back, white further increases his activity and threatens this pretty much inactive bishop who's going to be taken quickly. But that's not even white's main concern. He's going for checkmate. Notice that black is completely boxed in and his activity is close to 0. Of course, if the queen takes, then black's trying to gain activity, most likely a draw through tactics. Ivanchuk closes Kasparov off, further pushing his pawns, closing off the queen completely with the rook. And now even the pawn takes, Ivanchuk activates his least active piece with knight to f4, chasing the queen back. And there's a mate in, well, I guess 3 here. Queen to f6, rook, and then Kasparov resigned at this point because the bishop comes. A very beautiful checkmate against Garry Kasparov, the world champion. This is why Ivanchuk is regarded as one of the greatest chess geniuses of all time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the future. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for future videos. See you in the future.